Get ready to talk some MMA here on the show, specifically UFC, as we bring in the host of Ringside Report Radio Wednesdays and Fridays right here on TSN 690. You can also check out the website at ringsidereport.net, and you can follow Ringside Report on twitter.com. It's Dave Simon.
Oh, yeah, it's Dave Simon. Yeah,
That's your new intro?
That's a new intro. It's pretty good,
awful.
Right? I love it.
Let's not go with that again. What's going on MMA-wise, Dave? I see.
Okay.
The biggest thing that I've seen since the last time we spoke is what we've been talking about for a couple of weeks, finally made official. GSP, or it's getting there with GSP and Diaz.
It is official.
Is it official?
It is official. You know, we've been talking about it for a few weeks now here when we convene on Sunday nights, and last week you tweeted out that I thought 60% chance this fight would take place here in Montreal, and now we're sitting here a week later, and I can tell you 100% the fight will take place in Montreal. George St. Pierre, Nick Diaz, UFC 158.
Unfinished business.
Oh, yeah, it's bad blood, I think is what they're calling it. It really is unfinished business.
Yeah,
welterweight title on the line.
I need you to explain something to me here now.
Yeah.
Nick, for those of you that aren't MMA inclined out there, Nick Diaz, of course, suspended for a year for a substance situation. However,
marijuana metabolites.
Yes. However, when they say unfinished business, it was because they were supposed to fight, and Diaz didn't make press conferences. Explain this to me. I don't understand. This sounds like the stupidest thing somebody could ever do.
That's correct. They were supposed to fight in October and
of 2011.
Of 2011, yeah. And Diaz didn't show up for a pre-fight press conference.
How far before the fight?
2-3 months.
Okay.
And there was one, I think it was in Toronto, and he didn't show up for that. And then there was another one the next day in Vegas, and Diaz lives in California, so it wasn't a long trip for him, and he also didn't make that. So they decided, all right, well, now Diaz loses his shot because there are certain obligations that you have when you're main eventing a UFC pay-per-view.
What was his reasoning?
He said it was something with the flight, something with he couldn't make it or he didn't know. I think his official reason when it came down to it was he only found out like the day of and he wasn't prepared to leave.
Wow.
So maybe there was some miscommunication. Maybe Nick's just really hard to get a hold of. Maybe he was told and he forgot. Maybe he just didn't want to go and thought it would be cool if he didn't. I don't know what happened. But George St. Pierre was then told he was going to fight Carlos Condit instead. Condit was actually supposed to fight BJ Penn on that card. What wound up happening was GSP suffered an injury. Nick Diaz wound up main eventing that same card, fighting BJ Penn. He beat up BJ Penn quite impressively, then called out GSP. GSP was going to then fight Nick Diaz, even though Diaz had lost his opportunity, but GSP then aggravated that knee injury and had to go in for surgery so that Condit and Diaz fight was made for an interim championship with the winner fighting GSP. That happened in November of this year, and GSP beat Carlos Condit. Now, that fight between Condit and Diaz that took place in February of this year was very, very close. I think Nick Diaz won. Some feel Nick Diaz lost, but the fact that there's a debate makes George St. Pierre believe that Nick Diaz deserves a shot. George St. Pierre was available to media yesterday at the UFC Ultimate Fighter 16 card, and he told some people that he felt Condit did win the fight against Nick Diaz and he deserved to fight him, but he also feels that Johnny Hendricks, a guy who a lot of people are looking at as maybe the rightful number one contender, considering he's coming off several wins in a row, he says that he feels Johnny Hendricks didn't actually beat Josh Koscheck 2 fights ago, so he really shouldn't be in the spot that he's in. So, there's some debate as to the decisions of certain fighters here. There is unfinished business between George St. Pierre and Nick Diaz, and it's the fight that needs to take place. As for Johnny Hendricks, who's been all over the place saying he deserves a title shot after knocking out Martin Kampmann in the co-main event of the GSP Condit fight we had here about a month ago. Hendricks is going to fight Jake Ellenberger on this card. Jake Ellenberger is a very tough welterweight, and if Hendricks can pass that test, I'm assuming that he will get that title shot against Nick Diaz or George St. Pierre. So Hendricks gets another shot. He fights in Montreal, fights on the GSP card, so his schedule and GSP's schedule lines up so that they can fight next should GSP get past Nick Diaz. So a very exciting fight card we have. Not only do we have Johnny Hendricks making his return to Montreal, but we have Carlos Condit, the guy that just fought GSP. He will fight Rory McDonald, as Rory got a big win over BJ Penn, then called out Condit. Condit's the only guy to have ever defeated Rory McDonald, doing so in Rory's home province of British Columbia. Rory trains here in Montreal. He wanted to fight here, and he's getting his wish. So the co-main event, another great welterweight battle between Rory McDonald and Carlos Condit. So a triple main event for March 16th, and tickets will go on sale, I think, the third week in January, but I'll let you know exactly on Ringside Report Radio the exact date this Wednesday when I'm back on. I don't have that in front of me, but they'll go on sale in January. The fights, UFC 158, March 16th at the Bell Center.
Now, Dave, do American MMA MMA fans have any kind of gripe here? I mean, we're seeing another Montreal card so close to the last one. Seems like, of all the venues in the States, Vegas and New York, or not New York rather, but, New Jersey and some of these other places, Ohio's held cards before. Why do we continue to get them? Is it too much pandering to GSP or to McDonald?
It's just the way it lined up, really. There was a UFC fight scheduled here at the Bell Center for the third week in March of 2013. It just so happened that Rory McDonald's coming off a victory, and Carlos Condit just fought in November, so it would make sense for them to fight here. It just so happens that GSP fought here in November, and then, it kind of lines up that he could fight the third week of March. It just kind of lines up, and basically we're lucky. It's just the way the scheduling kind of worked out for this. So I think we're just lucky here.
Game Points here on TSN 690. We are talking some MMA, some UFC. I still can't get past the fact that a guy didn't attend press conferences to hype his fight, and he loses his shot in Nick Diaz. So I hope GSP just pounds the crap out of him the next time they face each other. But
that's an unbiased opinion right there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but
I hope Nick Diaz shows up to the press conferences. That's what I hope. I hope this fight actually does take place.
Oh, come on.
I hope Nick can get a license in February when he reapplies. And I hope he shows up here. I just hope he shows up. I really just want Diaz to make all his obligations. This fight, I think, needs to happen. I think Diaz
is he a legitimate threat to GSP? Is he somebody who matches up well?
Nick Diaz matches up tremendously with George St. Pierre. He's a guy that will always come forward. He's got very, very good boxing skill. He's got great jiu-jitsu. And that's, I think, very dangerous for GSP. GSP is a guy that likes to take you down and put you on your back. And Nick Diaz is very, very comfortable off his back and can submit you from that position. So GSP is going to have to be very careful of those submissions. But, I think he had good practice in that fight with Carlos Condit because Condit had a pretty active guard. He was looking for submissions off his back. He was put in that position a lot. And GSP was able to avoid the submission game of Carlos Condit. I say it's good practice, but it wasn't exactly a simulation because Condit's guard game, pretty good. Nick Diaz, much better. So it's going to be a bigger threat on the ground for GSP, and I think about an equal threat as far as standing up. I think maybe Diaz comes forward a little bit, might be a little bit more dangerous and tougher to prepare for, because he really has a unique style. It's a style that the Diaz brothers have all their own, so it might be a little bit tricky to prepare for, but I think that Condit was a good warm-up fight for Nick Diaz. I think GSP should be able to beat him. I don't see anybody at 170 beating GSP right now, but it's a very good fight, and I think that it's the fight that needs to happen, and Diaz is definitely a threat. He's a threat to anyone at 170 pounds. He's a former Strikeforce champion. He's the real deal. I mean, Nick Diaz, GSP is the fight. That's a great fight.
He's the real deal. Dave Simon, Wednesdays and Fridays on Ringside Report Radio right here on TSN 690, 11 p.m. You can also check out the podcast as well on ringsidereport.net, where he's got articles as well on the sport. Dave Simon MMA as well on Twitter. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Thank you.